Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One is an expert with years of experience giving free advice. The other owns his own microphone and can do the odd bit of editing. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leeks.
Hello, it's Andy here. Just a brief message at the beginning of this week's podcast, just to let you know that we recorded the podcast before the results of the referendum. So, since the referendum, we obviously now know that Britain has decided democratically that we will leave the European Union. And so Damien has asked for you to put your questions to him for next week's show. We're going to do a special next week all about the EU, the Brexit, and what it means to you. Please get your questions in. It's podcast@moneytothemasses.com. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, good to see your lovely bearded face once more again.
Thanks, Andy. I don't think many people on the podcast actually know I have a lovely bearded face these days. So, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I've grown attached to the beard, actually.
It's a new beard and it's growing on me. Not literally, it's obviously growing on you. But what I mean is you know what I mean. It's nice. I like it.
Yeah, and like I say, I've grown attached to it. And the wife doesn't seem... she seems to quite like it too. But anyway, enough of my beard, Andy. What have we got on the podcast this week? Right, some exciting news first and foremost. Let me just wrap up what we've got to do. We're going to do a little bit about investing, as we always do. We're going to have some exciting news about pensions and something in particular Money to the Masses is doing on pensions. And if we get time, we might end up touching on mortgages. But before we do all of that, we've got a sponsor. We've got a new sponsor, or our very first sponsor of the Money to the Masses podcast.
Wow, excellent stuff. Oh, we've been saying we need a sponsor because it's obviously the show's gaining lots of traction. We get thousands and thousands of listeners, so it's nice that we got a sponsor. Good. Okay, tell me, who is it?
Right, our sponsor is a firm called Money Farm. So go to a website called moneyfarm.com. Now, I've been and met these guys and have been impressed. What they do is they provide a solution for investors, so a DIY investing idea. So if there are people out there who want to have their money run by a professional on a discretionary basis. Now, discretionary means where somebody makes decisions for you. The problem in the past has always been that people are overcharged for that. But moneyfarm.com, what they do is they will actually build a portfolio for you of ETFs. And now ETFs are very cheap funds that can be traded very easily, and they will choose the asset allocation for you and do all the management and decision making. But the very interesting part is that they do it for a very, very low cost, and that is what makes them incredibly unusual. So I went in to see them before we'd even agreed to do any of this, the idea of them sponsoring our podcast, because they liked our podcast anyway. And I obviously, for our first ever sponsor, I had to be happy with what they were doing, and I went in there and I looked at it and I did like it. So what they do, as I say, they will actually run your money for you, because there are people out there who do not want to make decisions themselves when they run their money. They want somebody else to make those decisions, where they invest, how much, and actually how much risk they should be taking. But they want the low cost that's associated often with DIY investing. Now, how cheap is it? Now, when they run your money, there's obviously the underlying cost of the ETFs, which are obviously, we're talking about maybe 0.3% for a year for the cost of those funds. But on top of that, they actually don't charge anything for the first £10,000 of your money that they will run. So they actually run people's money for free on the first £10,000 that you put with them, which is actually, there's no one else in the market that does that, and that's what's interesting as well. But if you go beyond that, they have a tiered structure, so it ends up being between 10,000 and 100,000 they charge 0.6, between 100,000 and a million, if you go up that far, 0.4, and above a million it would be 0%. So have a look, go to moneyfarm.com if you're interested, and you can actually try it, because if you go onto their homepage, click on the top right hand corner, you'll see a Try Money Farm button, or you can just go straight through and go to the web address app.moneyfarm.com/UK/sign up, and then you can actually try using their their process and use the questionnaire that they have to actually put you in one of their 7 portfolios. But this is where it also gets interesting, because for obviously ordinary people, they do give you £10,000 up front, which they will invest on your behalf without actually adding a fee from themselves on top. But if you go on there and you put in a code MTTM 20k altogether, so anybody who's switched on today will actually realise that's money to the masses, 20,000. What you get is they will run £20,000 of your money before they even start charging anything on top. So that is a fantastic offer, and is exclusive to people who listen to the podcast. So go to the webpage that I just described, and if you put in the code, there's a section there where you can actually put in a code, just like you do on any other website where you're actually trying to buy something. Put in the code MTTM, so that's M for Mike, T for Tom, M for Mike, the number 20, and then K for kilo altogether, then you will get that offer.
Wow, exciting stuff. Okay, so I must admit, I've not heard of Money Farm before. Are they new to the market? Is it a new company? What's the deal?
Okay, for Money Farm, actually, what's interesting, they have been running in Italy previously, and they have looked at the UK market, because the UK market is, with the regulation and the way that we are now, where there is a definite interest in DIY investing and people that can't actually afford advice after RDR. We always talked about what was the retail distribution review, basically pricing them out of financial advice. They've come to the UK. So if you go and look at their website, this is actually quite a key point. If you go and look at their performance data, because they're quite open about how their portfolios have done, then some of that data is obviously reflective of how they performed with their data from Italy. But it's just as relevant over here. So have a look. It's very important that some people will listen to this and think, well, how does this fit in to what Damien talks about with 80/20 Investor, which is our own DIY investment service that we provide?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, the important point here is that if you imagine there are people out there who want to have financial advice, so they will go and pay for that. That's fantastic. Now, there are people who want to run their own money. Though those people who actually want to be active and make decisions, what we do with 80/20 Investor, we empower them to be able to make their own decisions. We enable them by giving them cutting edge data, research, and being able to give them shortlists that they can take actions from, so we can help them make better decisions to become more successful investors. But of course, there's people down the opposite end of the spectrum who actually, do you know what, they want to be really even more hands off, because 80/20 is obviously very hands off, but you have to still do a few hours, a few minutes a month or whatever you do, just to be able to make the trades or make a few decisions. But some people don't want that. They want somebody else to do the decision making, the asset allocation for them, and they're more comfortable with it. But they want to be able to do it at a cost that is pretty much equivalent to if you were to run your money yourself, to keep costs low, because keeping costs low is what's important in investing. So that's where something like Money Farm comes in. So have a look at moneyfarm.com. The reason I've done a piece about it at the beginning today is that people will hear in forthcoming podcasts a snippet where I thank the sponsors, because it's only via sponsors like Money Farm where we can actually keep the show going, and we can actually be able to push it out there and make it what it is, and actually keep driving it forward. So that's why I just want to say a quick thanks to them for supporting it and going forward. I mean, it's exciting times for this podcast.
Good. Exciting times indeed. Sponsor done. Thank you very much, Money Farm. I'll be looking at that myself. What else have we got coming up in the show? You mentioned it earlier. What should we do next?
What should we do next? Now, I want to do a piece on investing. What happened is I've been talking a lot this week with people about investment research. And do you remember last week? On last week's podcast, if you haven't listened to it, go back. And there was a whole piece on a bit of research that was written by Paul Lewis. And Paul Lewis is of Moneybox fame, the BBC presenter of Moneybox. And he did a piece of research that was talking about cash can often beat shares. And last week I explained where I saw the validity of what he did, and also some of the slight drawbacks and how you could improve it. But what was interesting, I met Paul this week and was chatting to him. And it's one of these things that people often misquote research. And they will get a piece of research like Paul's, And there was apparently in the Times, there was a headline which basically said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing here, but money expert says ditch shares for cash. Now, he never did actually say that. His research was just showing that there's quite often, it's really the opportunity cost of not having cash and actually buying shares. The premium that you're supposed to get for investing in shares over bog standard cash is perhaps overplayed, if you get what I mean. So actually cash doesn't do as badly as people seem to think or we're led to believe. So that's what he was saying. Very different to what the Times were suggesting in their headlines. So when we're talking around different bits of research, I actually came across something that was quoted in the FT. And it's a really interesting piece because I'm actually going to read some of it out to you, Andy, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
It was in a piece just talking generally about fund management and IFAs getting together. And now, it's only a particular paragraph. They were talking about how fund managers, and now these are the things like active fund managers, so the active funds where there's a fund with a manager, not passive, so a fund with a manager who's paid good money, who supposedly can beat the market. And that's different to passive investing, which is just effectively a computer running it for nothing, or because they don't charge anything, do they? So
yeah,
there was a line in here because the piece was talking about that fact, and they were saying that there was a piece of research they were quoting about the performance of these funds, these active funds over the long term. And one of the paragraphs says, over a 3-year horizon or longer, investors are likely, or just as likely, to find a winner from a list of fund managers with an absolutely terrible record as they are picking from the best. And now that was apparently the finding of this piece of research that the FT quoted and said this is consistent with a whole bunch of other pieces of research out there. Now, so what, just so people get what that means, is that they're saying that if you looked at the sort of top performers or people who are doing really well, and then your chances of saying, right, if I'm going to pick from that sort of top list, the Premier League as it were, I've got just as much chance of getting the winners if I pick the people that are actually in relegation who are abysmal, because they're probably just as likely to turn things around and perform well. Now, that seems quite... For a lot of people listening to this podcast, they'll be thinking, that's interesting. So what you're saying is that there is no mechanism by which you can pick tomorrow's potential winner, because that's what this research would suggest. Do you see where I'm coming from? Now, where this is interesting, if you go and look at that research, which I did, and go into the detail, what they actually were showed is that over the long term, that fact holds. So if you look over very long time frames, then there's very little evidence to suggest that if you pick somebody that had performed well over the recent period, that in sort of 5 years, 10 years, they would even be doing very well at all, and they're just as probably likely to be doing as well as somebody from the bottom of the pile over that you looked at. Now, what they omitted to point out is that there was evidence, that same research found, that on the short term, however, there was evidence to suggest that perhaps if you take performance from very recent time period, then that actually in the very short term, there was evidence to suggest that if you looking at the ones that actually performed well recently, they were far more likely to perform better than the ones at the bottom. And they sort of admit that just because they want to bash the idea of fund managers. Now, coincidentally, Andy, you might sit there and think, that sounds vaguely familiar. That is the idea of the research that I did when I locked myself in a room for 6 months, 2 years ago, and built the 80-20 investor algorithm. Was that's what the whole thing was really at its core, that there is evidence that you can, very clear evidence that the performance of a fund manager, what they call the alpha, the bit that they're adding, the sort of magic that they can actually outperform the market, can continue in the short term if they were doing well before, say, today, in the recent history. There's very clear evidence that in the very near future that will continue. But the further you go into the future, then that correlation between the sort of past performance and future performance starts to weaken. And this is really me pointing out, be careful of what you read when people quote research, because now what they should have done is they should have looked at that and followed through with the whole idea of, well, if there is something in that, should we explore it further? But what the headlines and the papers, what they will scream is that actually managers don't beat the market over the long term. Absolutely, 100% agree with that. But they do beat the market over short periods, and the key is actually knowing who's doing that over the short term and therefore reviewing things regularly. So it's kind of bringing this all full circle, complete with last week's podcast where I said about Paul's research, where he was saying people who regularly reviewed their cash accounts and their savings rate moved around could do better. It's the same idea here, which is again almost from the what would seemingly be a piece about how fund managers are rubbish and that you almost shouldn't be bothering with any funds at all, and barely passives are probably about the only thing that might actually work. Then if you actually dig between the sort of the detail, what it actually shows is the opposite.
Yeah.
It shows that in how you need to use them is to focus on the near term and the very short term. So I thought that was incredibly interesting. And as people know, I'm neither passionate about whether it's active or passive. You pick what's winning. And so there we go, Andy. It was another piece. How you look at research. Always dig deeper. Don't go for the headlines.
Interestingly, that's exactly how I pick my horse winners. I always look at recent form and never look at what they did the year before or the year before that.
Yeah. But Andy, you tweeted me this week. Didn't you tweet me about a horse that you claimed you won money on that had some...
Yes, it was called Damien's Dilemma. And it had a dual... There was a dual reason why I went for that. It had the word Damien and the word Emma, which is my wife's name. But it won at 9-2.
Did it?
That £5, that wins you what? Actually, I don't know what that wins you. What's that? 5-2.
You don't care about your winnings. I guess you've already put it on another horse that probably lost.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think I put it on England, and that was a surefire loss. Good. Okay, what we got coming up next?
Pensions, Andy. Pensions. That's what we've got next. There's an interesting headline that I saw this week. And it fits very nicely into something that we've just done on Money to the Masses. Now, the headline read, UK pension crisis. 11 million people would boost their savings if they knew about the pension rules. They were trying to name a particular pension rule. But again, if you go through the story, what it was is the research that was carried out by one of the large pension companies found out that really people don't know what to save into their pension. And therefore they're not engaged with it. And they don't understand pensions. And the idea of pension freedoms, where you can get effectively your money out at the end, you can cash your pension in. When people were told about those and actually were made to understand how they work, they then became far more engaged with the idea of a pension and thought, do you know what? I'm going to try and save into a pension, because a lot of people don't actually understand the pension freedoms that came in last year. So the very simple notion that if you put your money into a pension, it's not just locked in there forever and a day and you only ever get a slither of it out when you're retiring over a period of time. You can cash it in and buy that Lamborghini, as they claimed that everybody would do, but actually didn't. So once people understood them, they started to want to engage and actually build a pension pot so they can actually boost their retirement. So this is where there would be a drum roll if we had one, Andy. But in the recent weeks, we've been doing a lot of work of trying to... How do you get people engaged with pension funding? How do you get them to realise how much they need to save for retirement? It's quite a tricky calculation and a thing to understand. So, a lot of time, money, sweat and tears and brain power went into building a calculator. We've built a calculator on Money to the Masses, which will tell you if you go and put your age, when you would like to retire, how much money you'll put into a pension, how much your employer is. These figures can be zero. How much you've got in your pension already, how much you earn, and you can sit there and run the projection to tell you how much your pension pot will be worth in the future when you want to retire, how much likely income you're going to have, and how far short that's going to be of your expectations in life. So if you go to calculators.moneytothemasses.com/pension, so there's no S on the end, that's /pension, there's a calculator there that you can put in very few details, as I've just described, and it will not only tell you how much it could be when you retire, It will also tell you how much tax-free cash you can take, how much you could take in total. It will tell you how much income you're likely to get out of that pension. But not only that, it can tell you, well, okay, people like scenarios. So if you got to that point, what happens if you delayed starting your contributions to your pension? Or how much have you paid a bit more? Or what if you delayed your retirement? How would that affect your plans? So you can actually start to build a retirement plan. And it's a very hard thing to do. And it took us about, like I say, a number of weeks to actually get this thing built. But we just launched it, and the podcast listeners are the first people to hear about it. So go on there and have a play. If you're listening to this podcast on the train, get your phone out and go to that web address, which is calculators.moneytothemasters.com/pension, because it's mobile optimized. So it will work on a mobile. It looks beautiful, Andy, on a mobile, or an iPad. And that's the whole point. We want people to be able to engage with this stuff. And if you put in your email, it will actually email you a report to tell you, so you can actually look at it later. Because the problem with lots of calculators, you play with them and then you go off and you forget what they actually tell you. You actually will email you what the answer was, and so you can have it in your email and actually go back and look in the future.
That's really impressive stuff. I'm going to be doing that myself, and I'm not just saying that because I'm at a point in my life now, I'm in my mid-30s, I've only really just started to start putting money into a pension, thanks to a podcast we did a few months back. And I'm going to be absolutely all over that. I'll tell you what I'll do as well, just to make it super easy for the listener, is I'm going to pop that in the show notes as well. So whatever pod device you've got, whatever, click on the show notes, and the link there will be nice and easy to spot. It will be under pension calculator. Click that link and it will take you straight through to where Damien just said. Good.
And the whole idea of it is, I mean, there will be people who do run the calculator and might be a little bit shocked by the answers that come out, because they suddenly realise that their retirement isn't what they thought it was going to be, because it's going to be a lot less. But there equally will be people who may be pleasantly surprised. But the whole thing is trying to get a reality check. And what the people will realise, that the answer to a lot of this is just to start thinking about it that bit earlier, and maybe putting aside money sooner rather than later. But even if it just gives you a figure that you then go and bury your head in the sand about, you've at least, know the answer. Do you know what I mean?
You've got a starting point, haven't you? And you've got something that could wriggle away, a little worm in the back of your mind, and maybe make you do something maybe next year. At least it's going to help, isn't it? In terms of the actual results, are they future-proofed for inflation, or is it giving you sort of today's money figures? Because it's very difficult to know what 20,000, 100,000 is going to be in 30, 40 years.
Do you know what, Andy? That's a really good question. And that's why I do these podcasts with you, because I actually overlook some of these details, because it's very easy to get bogged down into the nuances of making something and forget to pull some of this stuff out. But what it does, it looks at it in today's money. So it allows for what inflation is. And some people may take a view on inflation, so we actually allow them to change. There's like an advanced settings that they can click on and change the growth rate that is assumed on your fund, or change the inflation rate that's in there. Or the other thing we allow them to do is change the assumption of the charges that you're going to have in your pension. So typically the thing is run on an assumption of 1.5%, because that's the average real fund charge. But if you can get your fund charges down to, say, half of that, then it makes a massive impact on your eventual fund and your retirement if you're investing over 30 years. And of course people can play around with that, and then that gives them a sense of what they need to do. They might sit there and go, do you know what? One of the key things I need to do is actually only invest in things that are going to give me a decent growth rate, hopefully, but also they've got to be cheap, because some of these, and it makes people focus a bit more on costs, because costs are important. So it's a very easy tool to use. It will literally take you seconds. I mean, people may think he will say that he made it, but the point was, I looked around there and wanted to build something that no one had built before that was incredibly user-friendly. So everybody listen to this podcast, go and have a play, find out what the answer is to your retirement planning.
Good. Okay, so we've done a little bit on our sponsor. That's the investing part. We've also done a nice little section there on pensions. It's only right that we should mention mortgages and do the full set. Mortgages next. What have you got?
We should do, Andy. You seem to have forgotten that I did talk about investment research at that point as well, but maybe you nodded off. I don't.
And investment research. Too late now. Too late.
Yeah, mortgages, Andy. Right. This is a very a quick piece that is on mortgages. It's very relevant. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are like me, and maybe like you, Andy, I don't know, but people who have tracker mortgages. There were about 70% of us are on tracker mortgages. That may be people bought fixed rate mortgages and they've come off those, and now their rate has plummeted because base rates are down at 0.5%, as we know, and lots of people, including me, benefited from the small print in their mortgage that said that it could only have to be, their mortgage rate could only be a certain percentage above the base rate. Well, that was designed so therefore they could always charge you lots more than the base rate. So when base rates went up, the lenders were rubbing their hands together thinking, thank you very much, we're making lots of money. They didn't actually have a plan that rates would be this low. So what it means is that there are plenty of lenders out there who are effectively losing money on, or certainly not making much money on giving people a mortgage. So people's mortgage rate, some people have dropped down to 0%. There were a bunch of people technically whose interest rate on their mortgage became negative as a result of the base rate going down. So theoretically, the lender should have been paying them to live in their house, which was a crazy scenario. But what really happened, they just said, you know what, we're going to just charge you a nominal rate of 0.1% or something really tiny, or just nothing at all. But what it means is that I've also heard, actually, as an aside, that people who have mortgages with the old style mortgages with Nationwide, which I'm one of them, that apparently it costs them £1,000 for every person who are on this old tracker rate because they never envisaged rates to be this low. Whether that's true or not, it's neither here nor there. The point is that they don't want us on them. So can mortgage lenders boot you off these cracking deals that people are still on? Because let's be honest, rates don't look like they're going to move anytime soon. The answer is no, but it doesn't stop them trying to get you to shift. And this quick piece is how to keep your lifetime tracker and not be coerced or sort of shoehorned off of them. Because what will happen, let's imagine you want to move house or you want to extend. Now, people who are on their current mortgages, that might be these incredibly cheap rates that they find themselves on their tracker, will find that they will go to their bank or their lender and will suddenly feel like they're being shoehorned to take out a brand new product at a higher rate. Now, that's because the lender doesn't want you to be on this cheap rate. So what will happen, let's say, for example, you were on one of these trackers, you wanted to move house. Now, a lot of them have what's called porting. You can port your mortgage. You can take it with you to your new house. So if you moved from your existing house to another house that was of similar price, you could move your mortgage with you and not actually have to borrow any more money. Now, if you did that, the only catch is you still have to meet their current lending criteria, the sort of the strict assessment they have. It's stricter than it was, say, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So you may end up failing it compared to what you were doing before. But what they'll do is they'll check that you still qualify before you can carry your mortgage across. So one of the tips is try and move your mortgage across. Don't just think that, oh, I'm going to move house, I can't take my mortgage with me. It was fun while it lasted, that cheap tracker. You can take it probably if you look at the small print, but it just means you've got to actually meet their new lending criteria. But what happens if you want to borrow a bit more money? Now, again, it may be that the lenders will try and convince you to borrow a much larger amount of the whole lot on one of their brand new products. But you can top up your existing mortgage with a new separate loan from your current lender at a higher rate and keep your existing one. But the tip there for people is to watch out for any early repayment charges that new portion has. And again, you will end up having to be assessed on the sort of new lending criteria. Now, if your lender tries to force you to buy a whole new product at the higher rate, so the whole lot, including your existing loan amount and this new chunk you want, and say you've got to go onto this new product and try and force you, complain, because if their T's and C's say that you can keep your existing product, that they can't force you. You should certainly complain about it and even take it to the ombudsman if you have to. So this is, again, that's the second tip of how to keep your tracker. Now, the final one is if people can't get that additional lending from their current lender, then you could actually take out a second charge or a second mortgage. And this kind of is similar to, in a way. There's slightly similar solutions. Do you remember when we were talking a few weeks ago about alternatives to people who wanted to get money out of, like equity release for elderly people? It's a bit like that. So what people can do is take a second charge on their existing property. So these days, the regulation surrounding taking out this sort of additional mortgage or keeping your original mortgage there, it falls under the same regulation as just normal mortgage lending. Yes, you'll probably end up paying a higher percentage rate, interest rate on that new second loan, but it's likely to be lower early repayment charges.
Yeah.
And of course, the other alternative is if you simply take a secured loan of some kind to get that extra borrowing. So if you take those effectively 4 different solutions, you can keep that lifetime tracker, even though your mortgage company will do as much as they can to try and force you off of it, because in the very short term it doesn't seem like rates are going to go up, and there are a lot of people who are making or saving a lot of money by being on them. So just be shrewd and don't be bullied.
Good stuff. Excellent podcast as usual, and I must say a warm welcome to our sponsors, Money Farm. Again, the link will be in the show notes if you'd like to check that out. Listeners, please do. Damien, what else have we got? Obviously, review the show, tell your friends.
Review the show. We had a really good review, another one on iTunes. Please add more. We need as many as we can because it boosts us up the chart. And one of them was saying that it was like fantastic content. I think it was something along those lines. Which was brilliant, and a great presenting style. So I think that might be new, Andy. I don't know if they were referring to you or me on the presenting style, or maybe it was both of us. I'd like to think your very well polished presenting style carries me every now and then, but there we go.
Well, anyway, kind of you to say, but I don't think so. But no, that's good to hear. Good stuff.
That's it for this week, Andy. It's just the usual Twitter, money to the masses with the number 2, and get in touch with us at podcast@moneytothemasses.com.
Okay, so until next week.
Until next week, Mr. Leaks. Until next week, indeed.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.